Today we'll be identifying the elements of culture. So what is culture? Culture is the knowledge, language, values, customs, and physical objects that are passed from generation to generation among members of a group. Let's dive further in. So culture is both material and non-material. Material culture can be any physical object that you can hold in your hand or touch. It can be things like skyscrapers, restaurants, cell phones, cars, schools, things that are physical objects that represent our culture. So, for instance, all of these things could be examples of American culture. Non-material culture are things that are not physical objects. Things like beliefs, customs, traditions, family systems, and the economy. Culture helps explain human social behavior and why we do what we do, and it also provides a blueprint that people in a society can use to guide behavior. Okay, so these are the different elements of culture that we will be looking at today. They're mapped out for you here, and we'll be referring back to this map throughout the presentation. So the elements of culture are language, beliefs, values, symbols, and then norms. And then out of norms we have folkways, mores, and laws, which are all different types of norms. And then there are also taboos, which are a type of more and a type of norm. And we'll talk about these in just a moment. Okay, so we're going to start out looking at language. Language is important for transmitting our culture. And we use symbols to communicate culture as part of our language also. The hypothesis of linguistic relativity is important here. It's a theory stating that our idea of reality depends largely upon our language. And since language differs, perceptions will differ as well. And we'll look at a few examples. Think for just a moment about this question. What can vocabulary tell you about a culture? What can vocabulary tell you about a culture? Okay, let's think about time for our first example. Take a moment and turn to the person next to you and try to come up with as many words as you can that relate to time that we use in the American culture. Okay, so some of the words you might have come up with are maybe nanosecond, century, millisecond, light year, moment, afternoon, minute, eternal, hour, annual, era, meanwhile, interim, regularly, recurrent. So all of these, and you might have come up with even more. All of these are words that we use that relate to time. Now think about snow. How many words do we have for snow, or words that relate to snow? You might have had a little bit more trouble coming up with words for snow. Did you know that the English language only has a few words to describe snow? However, the Inuit or Eskimo language has over 20. So we might be able to see from our vocabulary what's important to our culture. Just like in the Eskimo culture, snow is an important part of their daily life. So that might be why they have more words for snow. And just like in the Eskimo culture where snow is important and they have many words for it, in some cultures, something might be unimportant to people. And if something's unimportant to people, their language might not even have a word for it. And I'll give you a couple of examples here as well. When Christian missionaries first went to Asia, they were really surprised because there was no Chinese word for sin. Other missionaries were also surprised when they learned that some African and Polynesian cultures had no word to express the idea of one all-powerful single God. So again, when something is unimportant to people, their language might not even have a word for it. Okay, so we've looked at language. Now we're going to look at symbols briefly. A symbol is a thing that stands or represents something else. It's pretty simple. Here's some symbols in our culture. Clapping can be used as a sign or symbol of approval. The Confederate flag can be a different symbol for different people. It can represent cultural heritage for many white Southerners, or it can also be a symbol of oppression to some African Americans as well. So even the same symbol can have a different meaning for different groups of people, even in the same culture. Okay, I wear an Aggie ring, and it's a symbol of my time at A&M. Okay, now that we've looked at language and symbols, we'll move on to norms. To begin our discussion of norms, I would like you guys to turn to each other and talk about this for a moment. What is the expected behavior of a teacher with students in a classroom? What do you expect a teacher to do in a classroom? Okay, so norms are unspoken rules defining appropriate and inappropriate behavior. Some norms for a teacher would be for him or her to maybe stand at the front of the room or to lecture and give some sort of assignment, and to dress professionally, talk professionally, respect you guys. Breaking those norms would be to do a lot of the things that David Spade did in the video that you guys just watched. Okay, some other norms for other cultures might be a Hindu person valuing a cow a lot more than we do here, because that is what they do in their culture. Okay, also in some cultures, young women might marry early and have arranged marriages. And that's a norm for some cultures. Okay, Roman emperors routinely exiled relatives to small remote islands, and that was a norm in their culture if you shamed your family. So they are unspoken rules. That's the important part you need to remember. These rules are not written down, they're just reinforced by society. Here are some examples of norms around the world. So in Saudi Arabia, it's a sign of friendship to hold hands while you're walking. And this is President Bush with the Saudi prince at his ranch during his presidency. And a lot of people commented on this photo, but what a lot of people didn't realize is that it's a norm for a Saudi to hold hands with a friend. Okay, another norm from Saudi Arabia, it's an insult to sit in such a way where you face your host with the soles of your shoes showing. So a lot of people might prop their feet up on their desk like these presidents are doing. But if your soles of your shoes are facing your guest, then that's really rude in Saudi Arabia. In England, Scotland, and Wales, appointments are essential, and you may be 10 minutes late, but you can't be 10 minutes early. So it's okay to be late. In Senegal, you should never eat with your left hand. It's considered unclean and offensive. In Japan, if you're offered a gift, you should thank the person and wait 1 or 2 more offers before accepting it. And then you receive the gift with both of your hands. In South Korea, men go through doors first. So this is a picture of a man letting a woman go through first, and that's the norm in our culture in America. But in South Korea, men go through the doors first, and also women help men with their coats. The thing about norms is that they're so ingrained in our society that they guide our behavior without our awareness. We might not even be consciously aware of a norm until it's broken. And here's an example. Standing in line. We stand in line for things all of the time. And this is a great example of a norm. People do it. It's an unspoken rule. It's what you're supposed to do in our culture. And you might not think about it until someone steps in front of you in line. And then when they break that norm, then it becomes aware to you that that's a norm that's been broken. Okay, so we're still looking at norms, so now we're going to move on to folkways. So folkway is a type of norm. A folkway is a norm that lacks moral significance. An example would be sleeping on the floor instead of sleeping in a bed. Folkways aren't considered vital for group welfare. It's not super important that you sleep in a bed instead of on the floor. Society is not going to be harmed if everyone starts sleeping on the floor. It's just something that lacks moral significance. Other examples would be being quiet in a library, maybe wearing shorts with your suit. Wearing pants would be a folkway. Being quiet in the library would be a folkway. And also wearing mismatched socks. That's not going to hurt society if you break the folkway of wearing matching socks. Okay, another example of a norm is a more. And mores are norms that do have moral significance. Okay, and that they should be followed by society. Mores are based upon the word moral, and they do have moral dimensions and should be followed. And an example of a more would be a man. A lot of times in our society, we think men should be working. Okay, and only as of recently, as stay-at-home dads have started to become more popular and gender roles have shifted, has that become more accepted for a man not to work. But for a long time, that wasn't more. So why is conformity to mores a social requirement? What do you guys think? Why do we have to conform to these mores? Basically, in sociological terms, we have to conform to these mores so we can have social approval. And although following folkways is generally a matter of some personal choice, conformity to mores is a social requirement. And still, some mores are more vital than others in our society. For example, failure to stand at attention for the national anthem or for the pledge is not as serious as yelling profanity in church. If you don't stand for the national anthem or the pledge, people are probably going to give you a bad look, or they might say something to you. But if you were to start yelling profanity in the middle of a church service, you would be asked to leave. The sanction or the punishment would probably be a little bit more severe. Okay, so now we need to look at taboos. They are a type of more. Taboos are a rule of behavior, the violation of which calls for strong punishment. So for breaking a taboo, you're not going to get a dirty look. You're going to be maybe even exiled by your culture. You're going to experience a strong sanction. In Hindu culture, killing a cow is taboo. In most cultures, incest is taboo. Incest is what we would call a universal taboo. The definition of incest varies among some different cultures, but for the most part, incest is taboo everywhere. Okay, so now let's look at laws. A law is a norm that's formally defined and enforced by officials. They are consciously created and enforced. And mores are important sources for laws. Folkways can also become laws, though. Think about smoking. So not smoking in public was a folkway. It was maybe considered rude or inconsiderate to smoke in front of other people because of health reasons. But that has become a law now. Okay, now let's move on to values. Values are broad ideas about what is good or desirable, and they have to be shared by people in a society. Why are values important to culture? Let's stop and talk about that for a moment. Why are values important to culture? So values are broad ideas about what is good or desirable shared by people in a society. And values determine for us what is desirable in our life and important in our society. That's why values are important to a culture. They determine really what our mores, and our laws and our taboos and our norms, what all of those are. If we learn about other people's values, we can learn about other people as well. Different societies or groups within the society can have quite different norms based on the same value. And I'll give you guys an example. Think about the United States and the former Soviet Union. Both of these countries would say that they value freedom, but there are different interpretations of this value of freedom. Okay, one, the United States provides representative government, private enterprise, free speech, all of those things because they value freedom. But people from the former Soviet Union, their leaders would say that their value of freedom has brought full education, full employment, and medical care. They want people to be free, not to worry about these things. So same value, different interpretations. Think back to our article and discussion we had a couple of days ago. Think about Brittany Maynard. Okay, she chose to end her life and move to a state where she could do that. And some of you guys were opposed to this, opposed to her choice, and opposed to the idea of assisted suicide, as some call it, because you said you valued life. But others who supported her decision might say that they value life as well, but their value of life can be interpreted a little bit differently. They want a good quality of life. So same value, different interpretations.